Hi, I'm Dan Gold. I'm the CEO of MEI Pharma, a biotech company here in San Diego, dedicated to treating cancers, unmet medical needs. With me today is Jamie Reno. Jamie's a longtime cancer survivor, and we thought, this being Blood Cancer Awareness Month, it might be interesting to have a nice dialogue between a patient and a biotech executive to get more of a patient's perspective on how they see clinical trials, how they see drug development, and what we could do as an industry in incorporating their thoughts. So maybe just to get started, Jamie, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you...
Sure. Great to be here, Dan. So as you know, my name is Jamie Reno, and my day job, I'm a journalist. I was at Newsweek for 23 years, covering some pretty big stories like 9/11 and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and had a great run there. While I was at Newsweek, I discovered a lump on my neck, and I sort of put it off for a while, which is not something I recommend. But I didn't really even imagine that it could be cancer. I was so healthy. I was living on the beach in San Diego, writing for Newsweek. I met the girl of my dreams. We're engaged. I had a lot of good stuff going on in my life, and I guess I just didn't want to deal with it. So after a couple of months, my family said, yeah, you gotta just check it out. Cancer really didn't even enter my mind, maybe briefly. So I went in, I got an ENT to look at it. It didn't need a biopsy, it was inconclusive. So we took it out, and yep, it was stage 4 follicular non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, advanced, because they started doing, after the scans, they realized that I had tumors all over my body, which is amazing, because I really didn't feel that sick. And I'm sure you probably hear that a lot, you guys that are watching this. And Dan, I'm sure you've heard that. So I did chemotherapy. I went back into remission for about 2.5 years. The cancer came back. And at that time, I decided, instead of doing chemo again, which is what my oncologist recommended, I respectfully said, no, I want to do this clinical trial. And it was a radioimmunotherapy, an early immunotherapy, if you will, which at the time people were like, I don't know. They were skeptical. Of course, that has all changed. But the bottom line is, I'm now no longer in remission. I have several lymph nodes in my abdomen, but they're not growing. So we're in what we call watchful waiting. I like to call it watch and wait. I don't think watchful is a word. I don't know how people came up with that one. I call it watch and wait. That's just me. But basically, I'm watching and I'm waiting. I'm hoping that they never grow. It could be that they'll stay there, small, inobtrusive. They're not really doing much. I do have some chronic pain I had a lot of tumors, and I have head pain and abdominal pain, which I deal with. But I'm alive, and I have become, Dan, and you know this, my life priorities changed, and my career priorities changed. I'm still a journalist, happily, with Healthline. We're the #1 health news site in the world. We just passed WebMD. I've been with Healthline for 5 years. I cover healthcare, I cover cancer, I cover COVID now. But really my focus now is as an advocate for patients. And this is really a great opportunity, Dan, for allowing me to do my spiel and to talk with a CEO. It's really an honor, because I'm aware of what you're doing, and it's pretty exciting. So thanks for having me.
Well, it's an honor for me as well. As much as we try and think about our patients, it's not always first and foremost as it should be. So it's my pleasure to be able to do this with you. Maybe you could just tell us your experience a little bit about the clinical trials you went through, and actually, how did you find out about them? How were these options introduced to you?
Well, believe it or not, Dan, Google did not exist when I was diagnosed. There was very little information. You had to literally go to a library or just start making calls. But I knew that clinical trials existed. That's about all I knew. So it took me and my wife, she was then my girlfriend. We got married, by the way, 2 days before I started my chemo. because because we had a big wedding plan in the spring, but we just decided she wanted to be my wife, not my girlfriend through all this. And we just celebrated 25 years together. So
Congratulations.
she's my angel. I don't know if I'd be here without my wife, but bottom line is I had to do a lot of research. I mean, I had to literally pound the pavement and knock on some doors. And, ultimately there are resources even then that you could go to, I don't know if clinicaltrials.gov probably existed. I didn't know about it at the time. And that's one I recommend, of several that I recommend patients use now. But I was kind of in the dark. And that's actually the name of my first book, Hope Begins in the Dark. I wrote a book about lymphoma, which became, if I may say, the most popular book ever written about lymphoma. We've had 4 all new editions, and we talk about the treatments and the survivor stories. And but for me, clinical trials I wasn't familiar with them at all. It took me, a lot of time before I knew what they were, how safe they were. But it was a challenge. It really was.
Well, it sounds like, fortunately, your outcome was everything that we all hoped for. You had an excellent, by participating in a clinical trial. But even so, is there anything that, looking back, that you wish you knew now, then that you know now, other than Google?
Absolutely. I mean, other than the search engines, I really just wish there had been more of an awareness in general of clinical trials. It didn't get much coverage in those days, even in the mainstream press, the scientific press. Yes, and that's still a problem. We can talk about that. Mm-hmm. But clinical trials to this day, let alone all those years ago when I was first diagnosed, people are not as aware of them as they should be and need to be. A very small, 10% of cancer patients enroll in clinical trials. Mm-hmm. It's criminally low. It really is. And I wave the clinical trial flag because, look, I'm still here, man. Mm-hmm. I swear by them.
So you are an advocate for patients and for clinical trials. What's your experience been like when you try and interact with a physician who's doing research or with companies who are doing research? Have you been able to get inside of a company or to talk? I mean, you and I have known each other, and so we have this dialogue, but I can't imagine that's typical. What has been your experience?
The regular folks out there that don't have a media presence, if you will, they don't really have much access to people like you. And I do understand the firewall that may be maintained by a drug company and a patient, but it's too bad in a way also that a drug company can't communicate what their treatment is to the patient population. And I know you can in certain ways, but there are limitations, and some of them obviously are there for a reason. But generally, I just wish there was a closer communication network between drug companies and the patients that they serve. And I think that I'm seeing you nod your head, I think most CEOs agree with that. We can tap into the immune system now. And that really empowers a patient, Dan, because what you're doing is telling the patient, you're going to be working with us. Your body mm-hmm. is in the fight. You're not just taking a chemotherapy that kills all fast-growing cells. You're doing something that actually gets your body to fight the cancer, and that has an emotional resonance to it also with the patient. They're like, yeah, I'm in this fight with my doctor, with my drug company, and people do say my drug company because why wouldn't they? This is the drug that saved them. I'm writing a new book. It's called Lifesaver, and it's my definitive book on lymphoma, we call it. And in that book, I'm working with pharma, including you and many others, to get the information out about this newest generation of treatments, which is changing the entire cancer field, and it's exciting. It really is for me.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to say? And then maybe we'll turn the tables and put me under the spotlight. You probably have some questions too.
One of the biggest things for patients that I've learned, I've met thousands in the past, 20 years, I guess. The side effects are really, really, really a big deal, and they're scary. You see, historically, you've seen the way a cancer patient is depicted in a film, in a movie. They look like death warmed over. They look terrible. They're sick. They've lost their hair. They're feeble. That's not always the case in real life, but it still does happen, and it's scary. Mm-hmm. I had a horrible chemotherapy. It was tough on me. I'm the kind of person physiologically, I respond to the drugs, but I also get some of the side effects, which sometimes goes hand in hand, unfortunately.
Right.
We could have another chat about why that is, but I want to ask you one other thing, which is related, but I'm really excited about hearing what excites you now in cancer treatment, and and what are you doing in that realm, or what do you want to do in that realm?
Yeah. Well, my first, and what motivates me is, as I said, it's really to try and help patients improve their quality of life. Mm-hmm. I think that we all understand, for those of us certainly who have been doing this for a long time, that cancer is not a single disease. It's just a huge basket, and even in one patient, that one cancer, your cancer, is probably a combination of many, many things that are going on. And that if we
look how many types and subtypes there are of lymphoma.
Absolutely, and
like 70 or 60 or something like that.
There's a very large number, and what we're learning now actually is that as you look even within the patient, if you look at a biopsy and you actually look at on a single cell level, there are multiple different mutations. And so most of our treatments right now, chemotherapy still is the standard bearer for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma because it works. Yeah. But then the patients will relapse, and there will be other things that will happen, and we'll have other treatments.
I was going to say, can I ask you just really briefly to explain your technology?
Yeah, so our technology is a little bit different. It's not actually...
In layman's terms?
Absolutely. Every cell in the body, no matter if it's cancer or normal or going to make babies, it doesn't really matter. They all have genetic programs, and they're all trying to constantly interpret signals that they're getting from the environment. A pancreatic cell has to know when to make insulin. And to do that, it has to incorporate all these different signals from its environment and eventually get down into the center of the cell, the nucleus, and tell that gene to come on to make more insulin. Mm-hmm. So in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and other malignancies of the subset of white blood cells in our body that make antibodies, we call them B cells, which is interesting because the letter B, I don't know if you know, it comes from the cells in, those cells originate in the bursa of a chicken. And was first discovered.
I did not know that.
Yes, and that's where the letter B, people would normally think, it comes from the bone marrow, but actually they come from the bursa in a chicken, and that's where the B comes from. But these cells, they're integral in making antibodies for our protection, COVID, for the vaccine. Mm-hmm. So in order for a B cell to make those antibodies, they have to constantly be interpreting all these signals they're getting from their environment. And one of the important mechanisms that the cell uses inside the cell to interpret these and to figure out are a whole series they're called molecular pathways, enzymes that do things that eventually send a signal to the nucleus for something to happen. Mm-hmm. one of the more important signaling sensor enzymes in these B cells, whether normal or malignant, is a enzyme that's called PI3 kinase. And it's a very special one that's only found primarily in B lymphocytes and a few other types of cells in the body. And our drug is targeting that enzyme, so that if we can interrupt the signaling, the interpretation of the signals, the B cell, the malignant B cell, the cancer in this case, can't survive. That's the essence of what we're trying to do. So it's a very selective, small molecule that goes in and it fits into the cleft that this enzyme uses, and it essentially turns it off. And so it disrupts the ability of the B cell to interpret its signals, and when it doesn't know what to do, it just dies. I think that we've all grown up trying to come up with that one magic bullet.
Right.
And we know that we need multiple different ways of treating cancer, and there is no one single magic bullet.
Yeah. Well, this has been an honor. It's been great.
My honor as well. I really appreciate it.